There is a book that was never supposed to survive. It was copied, hidden, and sealed inside clay jars in a desert cave sometime before the 1st century. The community that preserved it was scattered. Their library was buried under sand and silence for 2,000 years. Then a Bedouin shepherd threw a stone into a cave on the northwestern shore of the Dead Sea. He wasn't looking for history. He was looking for a lost goat. The stone struck clay. Old clay. And inside the jars it cracked open. Wrapped in linen were scrolls no living person had read in 20 centuries. The year was 1947. The site was Hurbat Qumran. The cave would eventually be given a number 1. Scholars arrived. Then more scholars. Over the next decade, 11 caves were searched, some systematically, some by the Bedouin traders who understood that these fragments were worth money. Thousands of pieces of ancient parchment were recovered, bought, traded, argued over, and eventually, painstakingly, assembled into texts. Among those texts in the damaged parchment scholars would eventually call 4Q530 was a story the Bible never included. Not the story of Noah. Not the story of the righteous. The story of the night before the flood, told from inside the council of the giants. The Nephilim, the children of the Watchers and human women, had ruled the pre-flood world. The Genesis text mentions them in 2 sentences and moves on. The tradition that was preserved in every church and synagogue and mosque recorded their existence and their ending and gave them no voice. But someone remembered more than that. Someone wrote down what happened on the last night the giant leaders met in council. What they dreamed. What they said to each other in the dark. What they did when they understood that the ending was coming, and the ending was not coming for their enemies. It was coming for them. And the detail that changes everything, the detail that makes the Book of Giants different from every other account of the pre-flood world is this: they were not caught unaware. Cave 4 at Qumran was the richest of the 11 caves discovered at the Dead Sea site. More than 500 manuscripts. 15,000 fragments. Decades of work by international teams of scholars piecing the broken parchments back together. Line by line. Word by word. Gap by gap. The world knows the Dead Sea Scrolls for the great biblical texts, the complete Isaiah scroll, the earliest surviving manuscripts of Genesis and Psalms. These moved quickly into the public consciousness. They confirmed, amended, and deepened what scholars already knew about the biblical tradition. But Cave 4 also contained texts that fit no canon. The Book of Giants was one of them. The parchment fragment labeled 4Q530 is the most substantial piece that survives. It is written in Aramaic, the language of the ancient Near East, the language Jesus of Nazareth would have spoken 5 centuries after this text was copied. The parchment is heavily damaged. Whole sections have crumbled. Words are missing from lines. Lines are missing from passages. The scholars who have given their careers to this text are precise about what survives and what does not, what the fragments actually say versus what later hands and later interpretations have added. This matters because the Book of Giants has attracted more speculation than almost any other text from Qumran. It has been connected to the Manichaean tradition, to Ethiopian apocalyptic literature, to strands of ancient mythology from across the Near East. Scholars continue to debate its origins, its relationship to the Book of Enoch, and the extent to which its surviving fragments can be reconstructed with confidence. What is not debated is that it is old, that it was preserved deliberately, and that it contains something the mainstream biblical tradition does not. The perspective of the Nephilim. The flood story, as most of the world knows it, runs on a single track. Noah was righteous. God chose him. The ark was built. The waters came. The world was remade. Covenant. Rainbow. New beginning. It is a story of salvation, of a remnant preserved through catastrophe, of faithfulness rewarded. The Book of Giants tradition runs on a parallel track, same era, same event, entirely different vantage point. The giants who had built their civilization across the pre-flood world, who had no reason to believe anything could end them, received news of their ending in the form that bypasses all the defenses of the powerful. Dreams. His name was Ohya. In the surviving fragments of the Book of Giants tradition, he appears as one of the foremost figures among the giant leaders, not merely powerful but prominent, the kind of figure the other giants deferred to in council. He is not a peripheral character in this story. He is the one who calls the assembly. He is the one who stands before the most powerful beings in the pre-flood world and tells them what he saw. The fragments place the assembly at night, around fire, with the giant leadership gathered to hear what their leader had to say. The text does not describe the chamber in detail. The parchment is too damaged, and too focused on what was said to dwell on setting. What the Book of Giants tradition does give us, consistently, is a picture of the Nephilim as figures of extraordinary stature, significantly larger than ordinary men, in proportions that the ancient texts are consistent about even when they differ on specifics. Ancient audiences who heard or read this narrative would have imagined a space built to match the scale of what was about to be said inside. It was enough to fill any room. Hahya stood before his council. He was not standing there with military intelligence, not with a territorial dispute or a question of resources or any of the ordinary business that brings the rulers of a civilization into council. He was standing there with a dream, a vision that had woken him in the dark the night before and refused to dissolve the way most dreams dissolve, the way they fade by morning, leaving only a mood and a vague impression of images that meant something but can no longer be recalled precisely. This dream had not faded. He had lain awake in the dark after it. The fragments don't record how long. Eventually, he had made a decision. He would call the council. Not because he had a plan. Not because he believed the council could do something with what he had seen. Because a vision of that weight cannot be carried alone. What he described, in the scholarly reconstruction of the surviving fragments, was a garden. Vast. Ancient. An orchard that stretched to the edges of what could be seen in the dream. Workers moved through the rows, tending, watering, pruning, maintaining. Every tree was heavy with life. The roots were drinking. The canopy was full. Everything was exactly as it had always been. Then it broke. The surviving lines of 4Q530 record the destruction without elaboration. water, in quantities that leave no part of the garden untouched. Fire, moving through what the water has already crossed. The scholarly reconstruction is careful not to claim more than the parchment holds. The text is damaged at precisely the points that would tell us the most, but the shape is unmistakable. Row by row, tree by tree, root by root. Not a storm that ends and leaves the soil for replanting. The shape of the destruction in Hahya's dream, as scholars have reconstructed it from the surviving lines, carries a quality that appears consistently across the text: finality. Not the kind of ending that leaves open the possibility of return. The kind that changes the nature of the ground itself. After which the garden is not a ruined garden. It is not a garden at all. When it was finished, one tree remained, standing in the ruin of what had been an entire landscape, surrounded by scorched earth and standing water, alone, with 3 roots still in the soil. Hahya told the council he had woken from the stream in the dark. He had lain still for a time. The fragments don't record how long, and then he had called the assembly. Not because he thought the council could change what the dream had shown. The text does not suggest that. He called it because he needed witnesses to what he had seen. Because a dream of that magnitude, a vision of an entire world collapsing to 3 roots, is not something that can be held alone. Hahya finished speaking. The council fell quiet. The fire had burned low while he spoke. The enormous faces of the assembled leaders were lit from below by what was left of the embers, a dim, wavering orange that made shadows move across features that did not move. No one offered an immediate interpretation. No one asked clarifying questions. The image of one tree with 3 roots, standing in a garden that had just been everything and was now nothing, that image did not require a commentary. It settled into the room the way a verdict settles. Complete and heavy and finished. Consider what the giant council had built. What the pre-flood world, in the tradition the Book of Giants preserves, looked like before the end. A civilization whose leadership consisted of beings of a scale and capacity that ordinary human history has no equivalent for. A world shaped, over generations, by people who were not ordinary people. Settlements, hierarchies, systems of power, all of it constructed at a scale commensurate with those who built it. The garden in Hahya's dream was not obscure symbolism. 3 roots. In a garden that had held uncountable trees. The council sat with that for a long time. And then Ohya spoke. He had been listening without expression since Hahya began. Ohya, whose name appears across multiple strands of the Book of Giants tradition, who stands in the fragments as one of the most significant figures in the Nephilim hierarchy alongside Hahya, had not asked a question during Hahya's account, had not shifted in his seat, had not offered the measured, controlled response that leaders give when they are processing information and trying to manage how that processing appears to the room around them. He had been still. There is a quality of stillness that is not calm. The fragments don't describe Ohya's expression during Hahya's account. The parchment is a narrative text, not a portrait. But the structure of what follows, the way Ohya waits until Hahya has completely finished, The way he then immediately takes the floor suggests a man who has been sitting with his own information and waiting for the right moment. He needed to hear Hahya finish before he could say what he needed to say. He told them he had also dreamed. The same night. Not the same dream, the images were different. But the fragments place both visions on a single night, and the parallel is delivered in a way that the broken Aramaic makes legible even across the damage. What had chosen to speak to the giant leadership was not leaving room for one leader to dismiss the other's nightmare as stress or indigestion or the anxiety of a single unsettled mind. Two leaders. Two visions. One night. Ohya described what he had seen. In his dream, preserved in the surviving fragments, reconstructed by scholars from the broken Aramaic with the same careful academic restraint that governs all work on this text, there was a tablet. Not a garden. Something colder. More deliberate. A great stone inscription, heavy and ancient, covered in writing. The kind of monument that records who existed, who mattered, who was powerful enough to have their name carved into something built to outlast them. In the ancient Near East, such inscriptions were the highest form of permanence available to any civilization. Stone does not burn. Stone does not decompose. Carve a name into stone and you have given that name a kind of immortality. A wave came over it. Not a crashing, violent wave. The wave in Ohya's dream moved the way water moves when it has already decided, without hurry, without force, without anything that suggests resistance is a relevant option. It crossed the tablet completely. It covered every carved letter, every name, every mark that human or giant hands had placed in the stone to say, "We were here." When it receded, 3 marks remained on the surface. 3 signs. 3 names. Whatever the tablet had held in abundance, the full record of a civilization was gone. 3 things remained on the clean, wet stone. Scholars who have worked on these fragments note carefully that the interpretation of those 3 surviving elements has occupied theologians and historians for decades. The most widely accepted reading connects them to the survivors of the coming flood, 3 names for 3 people who would step off a boat into a remade world. Many interpreters identify them with Noah and his lineage. The scholarly literature is restrained about this identification, as it must be, given the fragmentary state of the evidence. But the connection between Hahya's 3 roots and Ohya's 3 names, the parallel structure of 2 visions arriving at the same number, is the kind of detail that does not require interpretation to register. 3 roots. 3 names. And none of them belonged to anyone in the council chamber. The silence that followed Ohya's account was different from the silence after Hahya's. The first silence had been the quiet of a room absorbing a single, terrible image. The second silence was the quiet of a room in which the single terrible image had just been confirmed by a second single terrible image, and the calculation was complete. The answer had been reached. Both leaders had dreamed on the same night. Both had seen the same number. The same outcome, delivered in 2 different images from 2 different perspectives. Not a coincidence. Not an anxiety. A statement. The statement was, "This is what remains." The Book of Giants tradition records what happened next. The council did not dissolve into chaos. The giants, the children of the Watchers, the rulers of the pre-flood world, did what the powerful have always done when confronted with information they cannot immediately act on. They deliberated. The surviving fragments suggest the council continued beyond the initial exchange of visions. The Nephilim leadership does not appear, in the text, to have taken the dreams at face value without debate. These were not superstitious figures who would collapse in terror before an ominous image. The traditions around them in Genesis, in the Book of Enoch, in the broader ancient Near Eastern literature that touches on the Watchers and their offspring, describe a sophisticated hierarchy. Beings who had accumulated knowledge across generations that stretched beyond anything ordinary human lifespan permits. They would have argued. Some of them, almost certainly, would have proposed alternative interpretations. One tree could mean the strongest, not the smallest remnant. 3 roots could mean the beginning of a new growth rather than the end of the old one. The tablet washed clean could be read as renewal rather than erasure. The fragments don't record any of this explicitly. The parchment is too damaged. But the shape of what follows, the decision to send Mahway, the specific choice to seek out Enoch rather than a different interpreter, the enormous distance involved in the journey suggests that the council spent time with the visions before reaching a resolution. The resolution they reached was not action. It was interpretation. They sought an interpreter. The figure they turned to was Enoch, a human. The Genesis text describes him in 9 words. Enoch walked faithfully with God. Then he was no more, because God took him away. The tradition that developed around that brief mention in the Book of Enoch, in the Book of Giants, in related apocalyptic literature from the ancient Near East, expanded him into a figure of unique access. A man who moved between the human world and whatever lay beyond it. A seer who could decode what ordinary perception could not reach. The choice of Enoch is itself significant. In seeking him, the giant council was acknowledging that the visions had come from somewhere beyond their authority to question or refuse. You don't travel to the ends of the earth to consult an ordinary human unless you believe that ordinary human has access to something you do not. The giant named Mahway was chosen to find him. The journey the fragments describe is vast. In one of the more striking images preserved in the Book of Giants tradition, Mahway's travel is rendered in terms that suggest it passed beyond the boundaries of the ordinary world, beyond the known settlements, beyond the terrain the giants had walked and controlled, into the kind of distance that in ancient cosmology placed you at the edge of something rather than the middle of it. He found Enoch. The account of their encounter, as reconstructed from the surviving fragments, is briefed by the standard of what surrounds it. Mahway delivered his message. The content of both visions, Hahya's garden, Ohya's tablet, the 3 roots and the 3 names, was transmitted to the one figure the giant council believed could read them accurately. Enoch responded. The scholarly reconstruction of his answer is careful and restrained, because the parchment at this point is among the most damaged portions of the text. But the shape of the response is legible. It did not offer a different reading. It did not locate an error in the giant's interpretation of the dreams. It confirmed the substance of what the 2 visions had already said. The fragments also suggest, and here scholars are appropriately cautious, because the surviving lines are fragmentary, that Enoch communicated something about the source of the visions. That what had spoken to Ohya and Hahya in their sleep had not done so accidentally, or arbitrarily, or as a kind of cosmic disturbance with no intentional content. The visions had been sent to the leaders, specifically, on the same night, with the same number 3 encoded in both, to eliminate the possibility of misreading or coincidence. Whatever wanted the Nephilim leadership to understand what was coming had made certain they would understand it. Mahway made the journey back. This sequenced the council, the decision to seek an interpreter, the long journey, the confirmation. The return runs across a substantial portion of the surviving Book of Giants fragments, which suggests it was the central action of the narrative, not the visions themselves. What happens after the visions? Because the visions were not the most important part of the story. The visions were the beginning. What followed them? The decision to seek interpretation, the hope that a different reading might be available, the journey across the world for a second opinion that turned out to be the same opinion that is where the actual weight of the account lives. The civilization of the Nephilim was not one that had been built by people who gave up easily. The giant leadership had maintained their position across an era the fragments describe as long, and the Genesis text marks as antediluvian, before the flood, a period the ancient world measured in generations so extended they are difficult to comprehend in modern terms. They had survived, presumably, whatever challenges had arisen in that time. They sent Mahway because they were not capable of accepting the first answer, which is not a failure particular to giants. It is simply what happens when the ending becomes visible before the ending has arrived. The distance between knowing and accepting does not close automatically. It stretches. It fills with activity, councils, journeys, consultations, every kind of engagement that allows the knowing to be held at a slight remove from the accepting, separated by the possibility that the next piece of information might change the calculation. Mahway returned with confirmation. The fragments go quiet after this. The parchment that might have recorded what the giants did in the days between the council's dissolution and the arrival of the water is among the most damaged portions of the surviving text. Lines are missing. Words are missing. The account breaks off at the precise moment we would most want it to continue. But the gaps in the parchment have their own testimony. Somewhere in the damaged Aramaic, the council dispersed. The fires burned down. Ohya and Hahya and the assembled leaders of the Nephilim went back to whatever remained of the world they had built, knowing what was coming. Knowing when the water arrived, it would not leave 3 roots for them, would not leave 3 names, would leave nothing. The water came. Every surviving tradition from the ancient world that touches this era records the flood. Mesopotamian texts, the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Atrahasis epic, the Sumerian flood story, all contain accounts of a great water that reset the world. The Hebrew scriptures, oral traditions preserved in cultures with no documented contact with each other, from the Americas to South Asia to the Pacific Islands. Many historians and archaeologists believe the widespread flood traditions may preserve cultural memories of one or more catastrophic regional floods events real enough and destructive enough to be carried forward across generations and across cultures with no documented contact with each other. The giants are not in those accounts as survivors. They are not in those accounts at all, in most cases. The mainstream flood traditions have no interest in what the Nephilim experienced. They are interested in the Ark, the Covenant, the Rainbow, the promise that such a thing would never happen again. The Book of Giants tradition is the only surviving text that goes inside the other side of that story. The only account that sits in the council chamber and records what the giant leadership said to each other when the warning came. The only text that tells us they knew. And knowing complete, confirmed, undeniable knowing did not save them. The tree with 3 roots was not their tree. The 3 names on the wash tablet were not their names. The fragments of 4Q530 and its related parchments from Qumran do not record the moment the water arrived at the council chamber. The text is too damaged for that. Too many lines are missing. Too many words have crumbled to dust in the desert air over 2,000 years of silence. But the silence itself carries something. Because here is what the fragments do tell us. After the council, after Mahway's return, after the confirmation from Enoch, the Book of Giants tradition does not record any dramatic final gesture by the giant leadership. No last battle. No monument erected against the flood. No extraordinary act that the text felt worth preserving. The fragments preserve the council. They preserve the visions. They preserve the journey and the answer. And then they break off. What happened in the days between the council and the water is the silence at the center of this story. A silence full of the specific weight of people living in the knowledge of an ending that has not yet arrived. Still in a world that is still there. Still meeting, still deliberating, still breathing the same air they had breathed on the night of the council. For now, the parchment is honest about what it does not know. And perhaps that honesty is the most important thing the Book of Giants preserves. Not a moral. Not a verdict. Not the clean resolution of a story in which the righteous are saved and the wicked are swept away and everything resolves the way it is supposed to resolve. Just 2 leaders, gathered around a fire at the end of everything they had built, telling each other what they had dreamed. And the long silence after. The fragments from Cave 4 at Qumran were not meant to be found. The community that preserved them expected to return. They never did. 2,000 years passed. A shepherd threw a stone. The jars cracked open. And the account of Ohya and Hahya came back into the world. 2 leaders, sitting around a fire at the end of everything they had built, telling each other what they had dreamed. Knowing fully, completely, with no room left for ambiguity what the dreams meant. So, tell me in the comments honestly, when a civilization recognizes its own inevitable collapse through the warnings of history, is it driven by genuine regret or merely the terror of losing its power? Because Ohya and Hahya understood completely. They sent Mahway across the world for a confirmation they already didn't want. They received it. and the water came anyway. I want to read your thoughts below. If you want to return to the darkest, unedited chapters of ancient history, the ones pulled out of the canon, sealed in desert caves, and buried under 2,000 years of deliberate silence, subscribe. Because there is much more still to uncover. The reckoning is about to begin.
Enter the realm of divine secrets. Welcome to Bible Confidential.